All right, good morning. So it's looking to be a beautiful day. My light bells came back on today, so that's good. So it's going to storm today, even though it is actually very nice outside. Walked around a little bit in the garden this morning. Lots of weeds. Need to do a lot more weeding out there yet. Things are very dry. That's one thing that we're starting to learn a little bit about is all the wind, especially the tremendous winds we've had over the last couple of days. Things get dry rather quickly. So, yeah, kind of exploring out there a little bit this morning, but still beautiful to hear the birds singing and all those good things. So we'll see what weather this afternoon holds for us. It looks like if we are going to get rain, it kind of downgraded on my weather app from major storms to maybe more rain, but it's supposed to come in later today. So we'll see. Who knows? It's the weather. You can, be wrong each time and people will still check you. So good morning, Jill and Connie and Shirley. Today, let's see, what do I got going on today? Today I got, I have a circuit meeting, Zoom meeting with the Iowa pastors this morning. That's something for me to get used to right now. Having kind of two different circuits, technically being a Minnesotan pastor, but having the Iowa side of things too. So it's actually a very rare thing to have churches in two different districts. So that's something for me to learn and work with. Actually, a really cool story. You guys won't believe this. The circuit visitor on the Iowa side, Pastor Simonson. Pastor Simonson actually baptized me. We didn't realize this until we started talking the other day. He and I were talking. He was just kind of updating some of his list for the circuit, and he's like, "Yeah, I used to serve in Illinois as a pastor." "Oh yeah, where at?" You know how the conversation goes. He's like, "Oh, a little kind of a town just south of Chicago." I'm sitting there. I'm like, "Oh yeah, well, my parents are from," and I mentioned the name of the town, and then all of a sudden he got quiet and he's like, "Well, I was pastor there." I said, "Our Savior Lutheran?" "Yeah, from what years?" And he mentions the years. And I said, "Well, you would have baptized me." And then sure enough, we looked at it. He did baptize me. He actually did a whole bunch of other things, buried a lot of our family up there. So kind of interesting, cool stories, how they go. So good morning, Levon, and good morning, Vicky, Susan, and Denny, and good morning, Katie, Vicky. Yep, there we go. So yeah, interesting things that you find when you move what seems like halfway across the country and you meet somebody. Lutherans, we kind of have a gene puddle, so to speak. We kind of all are related sooner or later. We just gotta remember who we are and where we've been. So anyway, today we want to talk about defending the faith. We want to talk a little bit about my favorite area in apologetics, defending the faith, and that's moral apologetics. So there's different categories of things that we look into on how we give account, how we give a defense of our faith. Just a recap from yesterday. When it comes to defending our faith, we aren't doing it for the reason of converting people. That might be an outcome, and we could always hope that's an outcome. We can always pray for it. But we have to realize that conversion, bringing people to faith, is the work of the Holy Spirit. And so we need to leave it in His hands. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, that's so freeing, because once we do that, then we can't mess it up. It's going to be on God and not on us. And so there's some wonderful things that the gospel allows us to do once we get out of the law ourselves and just go about our Christian lives. Okay, so now you're going about your Christian life, right? And this is a good thing. And you encounter somebody, maybe it is a family member. Usually that's when we find people in our lives as family members. It could be a coworker, could be a friend. So I mentioned that, I kind of worked with some people, especially back in my former town. And I meet people like through jiu-jitsu. Or I meet people just, in the library. I was in the library a lot. And, especially when people knew that I was a pastor, or I was wearing my collar, or just out and about, and people knew who I was. Eventually, after kind of having established some relationships, people would ask me about things. And it could be all sorts of different things. But one of the interesting things is most people want to ask faith questions, but they don't know where to begin. One of the reasons I think is because in the United States of America, and this probably comes from like our Puritan background way back in the 1700s, is we don't like talking about religion, right? That's like the taboo subject. You get to the dinner table, you start talking about religion, and right? Because we don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. We don't want to have big talks or arguments or anything like that. So part of the problem is we don't talk about that. We don't then sometimes talk about it with our children, especially when they're young, or our grandchildren. Or we keep it really basic and really simple, kind of a generic, Jesus loves everybody, so let's get along. But there's obviously a lot more to it. So moral apologetics is really where I usually go with people when they're ready to have the conversation. How do you know they're ready to have the conversation? Usually, as we saw in 1 Peter yesterday, it's because they have asked something. Yeah, religion and politics, you're right, Charlie. Yeah, well, some families will be a little bit more open to politics, but religion, that's become the real taboo I've noticed more and more. Also because sometimes I think, and maybe you feel this way, that we don't want to be preachy, or maybe we don't know enough, or maybe we will misspeak or anything like that. That's always going to be a possibility. That's a possibility with me as a pastor. That I can always know more. And I've been a pastor for 7 years now, and now and seminary for 4 years. And then I went to a Concordia, so I went to a Lutheran school, and then I went to Lutheran public school, not for high school, but for grades, part of grade school. And I still got a lot to learn, and I'm still figuring it out. So don't let your hang on a second. Don't let your feelings of lack of knowledge dictate the conversation for you. Try doing what you can. So sorry, I'm getting a whole bunch of texts back and forth right now. I'll have to deal with those a little bit later. Okay, so good morning, Juana and Angela. So today, again, we're going to talk about moral apologetics, what that means, and all those good things. There are lots of other apologetic styles, presuppositional apologetics, and other things like that. They have their place and their times to use them. I don't recommend them all the time, but when somebody's ready, and how do you know they're ready? They're normally asking you questions, and especially when it comes to just the generic faith in and of itself, I like to start with the moral law. The person who does this, in my estimation, the person who does this the best was an author named C.S. Lewis. You might have known him for Chronicles of Narnia and many, many other great books. He was a professor really at Oxford. He spent a little bit of time at the University of Cambridge, England, where I studied for a while. But he was mainly an Oxford professor. You will know his really good friend, J.R.R. Tolkien, who was the writer of the Lord of the Rings series. Well, Lewis was actually an atheist for a long time, and he actually grew up in a Christian household. I believe his father was a Presbyterian pastor, if I remember correctly. And especially with the First Great War, he falls out of it. He goes full-blown atheism, academia, atheism, and the like. And then really through the work and the talk and the conversations with Tolkien and others, Lewis starts to revisit that. Eventually, he becomes a great defender of the faith and becomes a Christian, and all of these good things. So his famous book that deals with moral apologetics is called Mere Christianity. And it's one of my favorite books to just kind of step through. And sometimes I think I'm going to try to figure a way to categorize this, maybe for the congregations as well. You can actually learn to step through, leading somebody through moral apologetics just by taking a chapter at a time. Realize if you are going to pick up this book, or if you have it at home, I actually brought my copy out next to me right here. If you do get this book, realize he is an English man, so things are spelled a little different. He sounds a little different, and he's also a scholar, so he does write maybe a little highfalutinly, for lack of a better term. But it is worthwhile to take your time to go through. So how do we begin with moral apologetics? I like the way that Lewis begins. And that's just to simply think, if you go anywhere in this world, and I really do mean anywhere, even if you couldn't understand the language, let's just pretend you could, you will hear people arguing, right? And maybe you don't need to go anywhere in the world. You could just come over to my house. I'm sure you can hear a few arguments between the kids or us and the kids or any of those good things. So everyone starts to appeal to some sort of right or wrong, okay? So this is why, even at the earliest age, and you can hear it in my little 3-year-old over at the house, they can say, that's not fair. You're wrong. That's wrong. That action is wrong. You're crazy. Any of these type of absolute statements, which we can make, are very interesting. What gives us the right to make an absolute statement? So anybody is going to have some definition of right or wrong. We're all going to have impulses towards right or wrong behavior. And almost any of the passions, anything that we do in life can be right or wrong. For example, speech is inherently neither right nor wrong, but we have a huge debate on speech going on right now. Who gets to say what and who gets to say what about other people? Is it proper? I'm not making a judgment statement, but this is part of the discourse right now. Is it proper to use racial language, ideas, or thoughts, right? We would say no, of course, but some people don't necessarily have that inclination. So impulses we all have, and impulses can be in any part of our mind, body, all those type of things, but it's how we act on them that will determine right or wrong. So if you don't believe me, by the way, we call this the natural law, the moral law. If you don't believe me, here's a great test, and you can do this really anywhere in the world. I think it's going to work. Go down to your grocery store or the marketplace or the town or anywhere where there's some people gathered. Maybe it would be the bus or maybe it would be an airplane or something, and pick somebody, doesn't matter who, and go up and punch them as hard as you can in the face. What's going to happen? Immediately, somebody's going to say, that's wrong, right? There is an inherent, with that one in particular, there is an inherent idea that there is right and there's wrong. Now, you could take that same thing if somebody's attacking you and you retaliate back. Now we might have a different conversation. Granted, the impulse is the same. There is a fight, but the impulse has been used differently. So what allows us to say randomly punching a stranger is wrong, whereas if defending yourself, maybe not so wrong depending on how we do it, right? There has to be some sort of standard. Now, some people will say, and I've had this conversation with an individual before, some people will say, well, these are just learned social behaviors that we just, have kind of developed over the years. Which that could be true. We could have learned them, but that doesn't follow then that we have passed them down correctly over time. And it doesn't follow that every single culture seems to have some of these things together. You can read the ancients, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans. You can read the Chinese, the Taoists. You can read the Buddhists and their writings. You can read any religion around the world, and we seem to have a similar moral statement on many things. Granted, there are differences. So why the kind of driving force behind everything, right? If it's simply social convention that we just do this so that we all can live together, it doesn't follow that it's necessarily learned. Why is it still right or wrong? So for an example, mathematics, multiplication, addition, subtraction, all of those things don't cease to be right just because you don't teach them or don't use them. They're still correct. They're still laws of this universe that still work. Just because you don't believe in gravity doesn't mean that gravity doesn't work anymore. Now, some people might actually think that, and we call them crazy, right? Now, in this day and age, in this world, moral and natural law is highly under attack. Watch Facebook for some of these more crazy kind of radicals. And you'll see that the attempt to define and rechange what language means and just how things go, yeah, some people might get behind them and champion some of their stuff. But man, some of the stuff out there is really crazy. And I think we kind of all realize that. You know, just like ultimate statements, all police officers are bad, or racial statements, all black people are bad, or all white people are bad, or any of these type of things. We realize these are crazy statements that can't be true about everybody, right? So could it be that there are some, and maybe even a majority that's bad? That can be true, and we could have conversations on that. But what allows us to make an objective moral statement? All right, that's what we have to get to. I'm 1,000 miles away from anything that we might call Christianity at this point. But we have to realize that there are objective moral truths out there that if we break them, we will be called wrong, people will be angry, and we will break more than social convention. So yeah, as I said, modern moral reformers do try to change this. They try to but even when they try to change the moral law, the things that we do, they're still basing it on some sort of preconceived moral notion of how the world works or how they think it should work. The question then is, does it actually work that way? We've tried a lot of social experiments, especially since the 1960s, especially since 1963, and the invention of the pill and all sorts of things that went on right in that era. If you think about 63, it's a huge turning point in culture. Kennedy's assassinated in November, the pill was introduced, won't be so far down the line when certain states will introduce no-fault divorce, and a whole bunch of weird things are going to happen culturally speaking. The question is, while we thought it might be morally correct, has it actually shown out to be that way? I would argue no. So we have to start somewhere. And so when I begin with somebody who says, you know, how do we know that there's a God, or how do we know who the right God is? Well, let's just start with some basic assumptions. Does the person that you're speaking with actually believe that there's right and wrong? That there is actually black and white to some things. Yeah, there's some areas that could be gray. That's true. But there's some things that are very black and white. Again, the punching somebody in the face example usually is going to come out pretty black and white, right? And it's very difficult to come into gray area there. Either you're crazy or you're, just a horrible person. Somebody who, if you get into a conversation and you start talking to them about the moral law and they're having trouble, you can use the punch in the face example to kind of see where they stand on that. And then the other place that I like to take that is if morality is simply subjective, or, as from this Sunday's sermon, if we are just simply a sack of molecules that has evolved over millions of years and all these things, what makes your version of right any better than mine? And in that case, what would it mean if what would be the difference between a Nazi's morals versus a member of the Peace Corps' morals? I'm pretty sure we would say the member of the Peace Corps' morals are far better, if not even the right ones, where we would not agree with the Nazis' morals. We shouldn't, right? But why do you get to make that objective statement? So this is where you got to get people to start thinking. Why are we able to hold the beliefs that we hold? Even an atheist is not truly an atheist. Yes, they might not believe in God, but they believe in something, in certain things, and maybe their creed is simply that they don't believe in a God. Okay, but now you have a whole lot of other questions that you must answer. Agnostics have to do the same thing. Why are you, as an agnostic who believes in some sort of supreme being, able to believe in a supreme being, but also at the same time believe that that supreme being's unknowable or may not interact with us as people? Why do you get to put that limit on them? Right? So really, the beginning point of apologetics, the beginning point of faith is actually asking deeper questions than maybe we're prepared to ask, or maybe even prepared to answer. So, some thoughts to get you through and to start getting you to think. for tomorrow is there a natural law? Do you believe in a natural law? What does that natural law mean? And how do you know that it actually works or functions in this world? I've given you a couple hints. I've given you a couple suggestions. And I think you can continue to think this through. That's kind of your devotional thought. Notice I haven't touched anything about Christianity. I haven't touched even a scripture. And that is probably going to be the beginning point for many people, is just to get people to think, why do you get to hold the philosophical, the spiritual, the understandings that you think you get to hold, right? Just stop there sometimes. Sometimes you got to let them talk. Best piece of advice. Here's a great piece of advice when dealing with other people in every situation. It could be in your business life. It can be in apologetics. It can be in the church, anything. Wait until a person is done speaking, not with their mouth, but with their body as well. So especially if they're agitated, they'll do all sorts of things, right? Wait until they're done speaking with their body and their mouth. Otherwise, you're just going to go ahead and you're not going to let them speak all the way through. This is very difficult. And, I've ran into several occasions, especially as pastor, where people really don't like the wait. They want an immediate reaction, and they want you to respond. They want an immediate reaction. You got to let them have their reaction first, right? And then what comes, what may, will be. So when you're dealing with people in apologetics, let them speak. Let them get things out. Let them think through. Try to track with them. Is what they're saying even logical? Is what you're thinking even logical? It's going to take some work, okay? So that's the basics. That's where I want to start you with. I don't want to get you too far down the rabbit hole right now. Remember, it is true what the scriptures say. The fool says in their heart that there is no God. That means that, yes, they have foolish, preconceived notions. The objective now is to get them to talk about those. Not you talk about them. Let them talk first and see where that goes. One preconceived notion that's very, 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 very popular nowadays, and maybe you have it right now. Here's a moral law thing, something to think through. Well, I can be a good Christian, but I don't have to go to church. Where's that in the Bible? Where's that? Why do we think that way? Okay? Not saying it's right or wrong, but think it through. Why do you get to say that? Okay? Once you start actually just taking the time to just take one statement, one religious, one spiritual statement, and think it through, there you'll start to find your answer. Again, this is law. We're not here to the gospel. We're not in 1,000 miles of Christianity yet. But this is kind of where it starts. Remember, especially as Lutherans, we talk about having law and gospel, right? You can't get the gospel until you've been thoroughly convicted by the law, until you understand what the law requires of you and you realize where you've fallen and where you've failed. So, right now, hold this intention for the time being. Christ still reigns and all these wonderful things. But start thinking through this week, why do we get to hold the preconceived notions that we have on spirituality and religion? Where do those come from? And why do we think in a world that we are able to hold certain moral things together? Most people are against murder. Most people are against different flavors of adultery in certain ways. Most people are against theft. Yes, there might be some variations there. Maybe you allow somebody to steal if they're starving or something like that. But generally speaking, we frown on theft almost 100% of the time. Why do we frown so much on people ruining other people's reputation? Think about the 10 Commandments. Why do we get to hold these moral laws as truth? Okay? All right. So with that being said, I hope you have a wonderful day. Hope everything goes well. As I said this morning, I'm going to have my circuit meeting on Zoom for the fellow pastors in Iowa, so I will be a little bit unavailable this morning. I do have some visits I'll be making out and about around town this afternoon. might stop by. I have slowly started stopping by randomly just to see how people are doing and all those good things. So you might see me, you might not. As I said, I'm being slow on my visits. I'm spacing them out and all those good things, but you never know. I might stop by. So if somebody's randomly knocking on your door, it might be me. And if you don't want to let me in, that's fine too. So God's blessings on your day. Take care, stay safe, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.